Iraq tonight. We have an exclusive look at what has become the single most dangerous city in that country for U.S. forces. An hour west of Baghdad, terrorists hold the city of Ramadi in a deadly grip, fueling the insurgency and taking a terrible toll on the several thousand American troops who are trying to hold them at bay.
This was my third deployment. I was a seasoned vet at 23 years old. I had never experienced anything like this. When the gunfire and the explosions are constant, you have to remain vigilant at all times, right? But coming back to the States and being unable to turn that off is probably the number one impact that I've felt in my life. So I had to find ways to combat that. I think a lot of us fall into the trap of medicating with alcohol or other substances for sure.
What do we know specifically about those who served in Ramadi? Well, there are documentaries out there that speak to the services of the SEAL team members. But what is known about the conventional forces who were not just fighting alongside SEAL Team 3, 5, and all other special operations units that were out there that have been featured in Hollywood type media? I am Robert Asensio, and today on Bets and Badges, we have the great honor and privilege of introducing Jeremy Gann, retired Master Sergeant, U.S. Army. Brother, tell me about, let's get right into it, right? So let's talk about the battle for Ramadi. 2006, let me set it up here. 2006, there was an intelligence report that was supposed to be for internal purposes within the Marines, a branch of the Marines, and it was leaked out to the media.
Among military commanders, there is a growing sense that defeating the enemy there may be impossible.
2006, U.S. military again sends in the troops, and all hell breaks loose. Jeremy, fill us in.
So in January of 2006, I was assigned to 1st Armored Division, 137 Armor, the Bandits. I had the unique opportunity to serve as an infantryman in an armor battalion full of tanks. We deployed to northern Iraq, a town called Sinjar, near the Syrian border, where it turns out we were really kind of staging ourselves 4 months or so up there. And around the end of May, early June 2006, we were aware of what was happening in Ramadi. Anbar province was a terrible place. The city of Fallujah a couple years earlier the Marines had gone in there and really cleared out a cluster of Al-Qaeda in Iraq cells. And it turns out most of them fled to Ramadi, which was a pretty large city. They referred to it as the Sunni Triangle. And so the idea from the operational level, I guess at that time, the Marines controlled Anbar province, but in Ramadi, there were large swaths of the city that they couldn't go in.
Controlled by IQA, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's right. Yeah.
That's Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Then you had the Ba'ath loyalists who had been deposed from basically governance of the country. And so they're left over. You had foreigners coming in that were non-American, actually non-sympathetic to American cause. It was like a hotbed for just an outright war.
Yeah. So the idea was to take the city back. And so they brought in armored troops. We rolled in with tanks and Bradleys, dismounts. We had some special operations elements that were attached and operating alongside us. And the idea was to go and take a small piece of the city at a time, clear it out, build a combat outpost, and live and operate out of that outpost. Prior to, there would be units that would go and clear a section of the city, but if you leave and go back to your comfy tent, in this case it was Camp Ramadi, they just have an opportunity to jump right back in there. So we went in and we would take a piece of the city, clear it, and build a combat outpost and live out of that outpost and conduct all our operations from there.
Let's talk about the COPS, if you will, the combat outpost. So the initial one was Camp Ramadi, but then there were other parts of the city that you guys that needed to go in. And as a matter of fact, the mission created or established by the U.S. Army was seize, clear, hold,
Yep.
And then from there, that meant that you guys would have to go into the combat zone, the red zone, the hostile forces. So let's talk about real quick, you guys, so that we can build backwards, if you will.
For
So
sure.
you're in country, you guys are seeing combat. What were the sites like?
I had never experienced anything like this, and certainly in an urban environment. Certainly when we got there, you could tell that this city had experienced quite a bit of destruction. The Marines had been there for several years, holding it to the best of their capabilities, but large portions of Central and South Ramadi were just, that was Al Qaeda and Iraq headquarters. As you mentioned, foreign fighters, whoever really wanted to come get a piece of the Americans, had kind of flooded into this city. So buildings, destroyed, crumbled. That's the most vivid sight that comes to mind. One thing that I think many people would not consider is the primitive sewage and sewer capabilities of a city like that. So when you roll through with tanks and Bradleys on these streets, it crushes all of that. So sewage would leak up, and it ended up being just ponds of, ankle to knee deep sewage everywhere that we sometimes would have to walk through, but certainly drive through in Humvees. And so the smell of that still lingers to this day sometimes.
This was your third deployment, as you said. So what were your
Keeping men alive. I mean, that's the number one thought, keeping men alive and taking the fight to the enemy. As a staff sergeant, which is probably the best job in the military, to be a staff sergeant, squad leader, infantry squad leader in combat, you really are responsible for the morale, health, and welfare of those guys assigned to you. I had a tremendous sense of responsibility for those guys that were with me. And so every day, day and night, the thought that is utmost in your mind is keeping our guys alive.
share with us some visual references of the people you came across, the insurgents, if you will, the combat hostile forces towards the Americans?
I had the privilege of being on a team that was on a joint operation with SEAL Team 3, I believe is the guys that were there at the time. And we did a water insertion on Marine boats down the Euphrates, pulled up to a bank a couple kilometers away from where combat outpost Falcon would be. This was the night prior to, right? And so my team, along with, 20 to 30 SEALs, did this water infill, moved through the city. Interestingly enough, at the time, I was the most ranking member of my element, and I did not have direct communication with the SEALs, right? So these guys were on point, and we're walking mostly in a file down these alleys, and we're kind of weaving our way to our objectives. And at certain points, we would all break off and go set up sniper positions. Well, we're walking through this very hostile city, and we heard a couple of rounds being popped off from the front of this element. And I had no communication with the guys, and my guys are like, assuming a security posture, what the heck's going on? It wasn't until 15 years later, maybe, I watched a documentary that was made by the History Channel, and it told the story of this operation. And it was the lieutenant for the SEAL team, and I believe Chris Kyle, who has gone on to, sniper fame, were the point men for this. And there's a funny little story about a battery had died on someone's infrared laser.
Yeah.
And
Chris Kyle's, to be exact.
yeah. And so the lieutenant took out at least one or two hostiles that they saw in a door frame with, holding an AK-47. And we had no idea, that we heard a couple rounds. It turns out they took somebody out, and then we carried on with our mission. Yeah, we went on to set up sniper positions all around. There was a few buildings, maybe 5 or 6 buildings, that someone had chosen as the strategic location for Combat Outpost Falcon. And we sat there on Overwatch.
So you're responsible for, establishing a very, very key outpost for the American troops. That's just, brother, you may not see it, but I'm telling you, I am honored and thrilled that I'm actually speaking with you and that we are sharing your story, because
brother.
key to what comes afterward. And the fact that American troops' lives and allies' lives were saved, because beforehand, US troops and our allies were being killed as they were trying to bring peace to that very war-torn province. Am I right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Jeremy, can you talk to the atrocities that these enemy forces were committing on their own civilian population, that you guys were there to prevent them from victimizing any more of the community?
There was very little regard for the civilian population by the enemy. I'll use the term jihadists. They were mixed in with the population, and there were threats as we would talk to civilians during our interactions with them. They were very scared, very hesitant to communicate with the Americans, of course, because of what would happen to them, that night. Someone come into their house and, do whatever harm they pleased. So that was a large part of the battle for us to convince civilian, in the attempt to gain intel. Another strategy of the combat outpost, to show the population that was left that we're here. We're not just coming in here patrolling or stirring up a hornet's nest and then we're going back to the comfort of our camp, several kilometers away behind the wire and the barriers. We're here in the neighborhood. So I think it helped provide a little bit of sense of comfort and safety for those civilians still there.
One thing that I always find really worth mentioning in these stories is the fact that the threat was always there, because you hear the enemy shooting at you, right? You had mentioned to me offline about you can continuously hear the gun fire, specific ring of an AK-47, the spring, if you will. That sound, that distinctive
Yeah.
sound.
Very distinct, yeah.
And you hear the explosions, but the fact that the people who were trying to kill you guys, all they had to do was drop their weapons and walk away and just maybe take a couple steps, and they're all of a sudden they're part of the civilian force, and you don't know who's who. Am I right?
Yeah, blend right in. Yeah, urban combat, it made it difficult to distinguish. And we certainly didn't want any civilian casualties on our conscience, so it did require a high level of
Discipline.
discipline. Thank you. I was searching for the word there. Yeah, high level of discipline. Right. Yeah, for sure.
And some serious nerves of steel, bro. So tell me, how did this impact you?
It's taken me a lot of years to sort that out and unpack. Hypervigilance is probably the first word that comes to mind, that you don't realize in yourself. That sense of always, in that setting, it keeps you alive. And when the gunfire and the explosions are constant, you have to remain vigilant at all times, right? But coming back to the States and being unable to turn that off is probably the number one impact that I felt in my life. And it took me over 10 years to reach out to anyone for assistance. And then it's taken several more years and different tools available to us to help mitigate that.
Reflecting on you and your experiences, you could see a difference between life before the war combat and then life after. Can you talk a little bit about that? Tell us what you were walking through, what you're feeling, and what you're experiencing.
Well, I would start with, I guess it's those closest to us, our family and friends that really notice it more than we can notice it for ourselves, especially without some really serious reintegration. So, the family notices that you are distant. The family and friends notice that you are always on edge, won't sit with your back to an entryway, always looking out for what the next move is, right? And if this happens, this is what I'm going to do, regardless if you're in a comfortable, city here in the United States. So they're really the ones that notice. I denied that there was a problem. Our infantry troops are trained to push through, exhibit grit is a word. I know my friend Dr. Ben Yopes has been on your podcast a few times. That's a word that he's fond of using. So I had to find ways to combat that. I think a lot of us fall into the trap of medicating with alcohol or other substances for sure. And I face my demons there as well. Hopefully with some assistance from our brothers, we find a way out. And when we do, it can be a very transformative experience, and we can come out on the other end of it with a level of growth and
Post-traumatic growth.
post-traumatic growth. Yeah, a level of spiritual awareness that certainly never seemed possible before for me. So I do take it as, there's a lot of traditions around the world that refer to, if you learn to die before you die, that's the key to immortality. And so for us guys, that certainly accepted death, kind of stared it in the face every day, learning to see that, bringing our awareness to that, bringing our awareness to the stories that we tell ourselves, in our minds, that here I'm safe, but the mind can be a very, very tricky thing, and it can get out of control on us pretty easily.
Yeah, you can get in your head and the doubts, the anxiety, the fear.
For sure.
Brother, tell me about, like, you just made me think of something. We seldom ask people who have the courage to say that they're medicating, self-medicating, right? For lack of a better term.
Yeah.
We very seldom ask them, what were you self-medicating from?
Right. Yeah. Basically the thoughts in your head, reliving stories that are continuing to take place in your
Can you
mind.
share those for those people that this video can benefit, where they can draw some similarities of what they were thinking versus what you were thinking?
Well, I could share a little story just driving. This is several years after I'd been my last trip to combat, driving down a road, and I'm driving my truck. I'm not sure where I was headed at the time, but there's a lot of guns around here, right? Some good old boys shooting off his rifle, and instincts kicked in, whipped my vehicle off the road. I'm reaching for my firearm, I'm reaching for my rifle to return fire. It was probably 20 seconds before I was able to regain my composure and realize, where I was at the time.
That's an eternity, 20 seconds, bro.
Whoa, yeah. And when you're, on a busy road, busy-ish road, and you just whip it right off, there was no consideration for, other civilians around. I blacked out, for lack of a better term,
Mm.
So I think that's something a lot of people experience. I can only speak for myself. Very, certain little clips, it would come to me in just small little clips of things that had happened, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in a waking state. Is the best way I could describe it.
So you guys were seeing you being bombed, you're being shot at, being exposed to hell, and you're living to that. That's day after day after day. That's compound, trauma.
Yeah,
Trauma.
absolutely.
And that's
Trauma,
where the
yeah.
complex PTSD comes from. And, you also lost some team members. You want to share with that? At least one story that you can share with the audience.
Sergeant Nicholas Gibbs. I was the sergeant of the guard at the time. We had moved on to a different combat outpost from Falcon. We went on to build another combat outpost a little further into the city, where we spent 5 to 6 months, something like that. He was on guard in one of the towers, which had ballistic glass around about chest height. He was drawn out by a white flashing light a couple times. He called down on the radio and mentioned, "Hey, I see a white light," and I was actually the guy on the other end. And so we're going back and forth on about what this could be. Sometime during that period, he stood up to get a better look at what he was seeing, and there were three distinct, slower than, the automatic fire that we heard a lot. One of them caught him in the jaw. And so there was a race. This building had 3 levels to it. So one of the other team members that were on guard at the time called, "Hey, Gibbs is down." I go racing up the stairs, hollering out to this. A lot of people were asleep. I don't recall the exact time frame. This was 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and found that he was in a pretty rough condition. Did the medic that was assigned to us at the time, did all he could, on the rooftop of this building in Ramadi, Iraq at night, with only a tactical flashlight attached to the end of a rifle, performed a tracheotomy on Gibbs, a 19-year-old medic. Did this. We were able to get him down the stairs and get him into a vehicle, rush him to Camp Ramadi, where, he was pronounced KI.
So the reason why I ask you to go into that detail is because, again, to show the amount of hell that you were put through and in defense of our country, in defense of our freedom. You mentioned about how you self-medicated, trying to escape these thoughts, these memories, and you go down an ugly path. But tell me about the triumph, how you triumph over this hell that you lived and is inside your head, the warrior that you are today, and help our brothers and sisters out there that will be listening to this and anybody that'll hear that can benefit from your story. Talk to us about it.
Sure. Well, thank you, man. That's certainly the primary goal for what remains of my life now, is making sure that I could help out anyone that might benefit from the story and some of the tools that have helped me. We can't expect our young warriors to go kill and experience death and killing and to return home and contain all that in a healthy way. And our society doesn't do a great job of reintegrating the warrior back, into being a functional member of the society. So me personally, I was married at the time. I had 2 very young daughters. So there was no thought of, I need help. No one really talked to me about seeking any type of psychiatric help or counseling. And so one day I was in the Army, and the next day I wasn't, and had a family to take care of. So it took many years of those around me pointing out, the issues with anger, the issues with hypervigilance, easily frustrated, that sort of thing.
Did you open up to the family at all?
Not very much, certainly not initially, because once again, you're trained to compartmentalize those things, and this has been a long process. We're talking about the events that we're discussing today were almost 20 years ago. And so it's been quite a journey, during that time. A lot of alcohol involved. But I attended in 2020, I was able to attend a program called Save a Warrior, or SAW. And it's a holistic program that combines a lot of neuroscience, psychotherapy, spirituality. It uses the foundations of the 12 steps, knowing that alcohol or substance abuse comes along, is kind of part of the deal with folks that go through those things. It taught me how to grieve that and to let it go. It introduced me to meditation, which is a tremendous tool that is overlooked, honestly, in Western society as a way to calm and still our minds, and to see that those thoughts are just thoughts. Those memories, those thoughts, they come, but they're not tangible. They're not happening right now. They just float through our head. And so that allowed me to, I quit drinking, quit using all the medications that the VA had dumped on me, or other, doctors. I was on quite a cocktail of numerous medications at the time. Yeah, taught me how to breathe, to activate that asympathetic nervous system, and just create a little space between the amygdala when it's reacted in a fight or flight scenario, create a little bit of space there so you're able to respond rather than react.
Yeah, man, that breathing, creating that space through breath, control of thought. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a principle in life.
Yeah,
You
life
experience it when
changing.
you're in the field. Take the breath before you take the shot, and now take a breath to calm down,
Yeah.
brother.
There are tools such as meditation that work. I'm not a salesman for meditation here. I'm the example. So it's worked for me, and it really changed my life in just a tremendous way. I'm very thankful. And so any way that I could help my brothers and sisters out there, that's my continued mission in life.
So I take it from you is that what you're saying is overcome the thought that you can't explain to anybody else what you're going through because they won't understand. You must overcome that to speak and share how you're feeling in order to recover. Am I hearing you correctly?
Certainly, any type of suicidal ideation, or in the moment that you feel like overwhelmed and you're ready to end this game, sometimes just being able to get that out and talk to a fellow brother or sister about what you're experiencing. It's amazing, how you can come out of that conversation with a different outlook, for sure.
And let's face it, you're not alone. And for anybody that's out there that has any suicide ideations, any thoughts, anything that would consider them harming themselves, please reach out to the suicide hotline, 988 national hotline. Please reach out to someone because you're not alone. You're not the only one that's gone down this path. Let's keep it real. Let's keep it together and let's help one another.
Thank you for allowing me on and to share this story. My only hope would be that someone hears it that might need it, or it brings someone's awareness to reintegrating our warriors back into society. That's the biggest subject.
There you go. So retired Master Sergeant Jeremy Gann, U.S. Army, to the Miami's Community News team, Grant Michael Miller, our producer Alex Sukas, behind the scenes, always there. We can't thank you enough. To you, the audience, and Jeremy, brother, we look forward to speaking with you. You, the audience,
Thanks,
drop us a
brother.
line. Let us know what you'd like us to show more of. I am Robert Asensio, and this has been another episode. Thank you.